Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, what a good-looking group we've got out here tonight. My name is Cindy Rogers, and I would like to welcome you this evening on behalf of Homeland Community Bank and our staff. We're so glad to see each of you here. It's such a beautiful evening to be out, and we thank you for taking your time to share with us this evening. A few housekeeping notes. Our restrooms are to my left in the back if you need those through the evening. Also, we hope everyone registered when you come in. We want all the survivors to register so we have current information, name, address, so we can send you a postcard for next year. T-shirts were in the back, so if you did not get those picked up, please do so. Also, the handprints. And hopefully, as you were standing there, you had saw the sheets from each of our previous years and your handprint up there with the number of years as a survivor. Before we start our meal, we're going to ask a couple of young ladies to come to the mic, and we'll also have our invocation. We will ask Miss Haley Taylor and Miss Riley Ribby. They will come lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. They are two of our survivors.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, girls. Aren't they beautiful young girls? We're going to ask Mr. Brian Kell with PEG Broadcasting. Brian is also a survivor to come for our invocation before our meal.
Thank you, Cindy. Let's bow our heads and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear God, thank you so much for today. God, we are your children, and just like many, many, many years ago, many of us, in fact, maybe even all of us in this room, have spent time in the wilderness. But God, just like in the stories of old, you rose up a leader named Joshua who was strong and courageous. And God, we ask you today and for the rest of our days to raise up in us our Joshua. Help us to be strong and courageous for family members, for friends, and for each other, and also for you. God bless this food. God bless Homeland Community Bank for doing this. And thank you so much for your son that died on the cross for our sins. In Christ we pray. Amen.
Since 1990, Terry Bolger has been bringing you stories of the people and places that make Tennessee unique and interesting. Terry attended the University of Missouri in Columbia and graduated with a Bachelor's of Journalism degree. He received the Chick Evans Scholarship awarded to hard-working caddies who spent much of their young lives on the golf course. All right, you baseball fans, listen up. He spent 3 summers as a vendor at Chicago's Wrigley Field and Kaminsky Park, taking a pay cut to pursue a career in television. Terry worked in Amarillo, Texas and Cedar Rapids, Iowa before coming to Nashville in 1990. He won 10 Emmy Awards, an Iris Award from the National Association of Television Programming Executives, and has more than a dozen other regional honors for Best Feature Story and Best Writing. Terry has interviewed everyone from presidents to Michael Jordan. He's covered plane crashes and droughts. But most remember the modest folks he meets each day along Tennessee's back roads. A lot of people say he likes to find the unusual on these back roads, but in some ways what he does find isn't always that strange. It's just real. His stories are often a mix of peach seed carvers, blues guitarists, and humble hog farmers. In a way, his stories are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. If you ever feel that you have to do something bad these days to get on the news, what Terry does is prove every day that that doesn't have to be the case. And aren't we glad he does that? Friends, and Terry, you have a lot of them here. Please join me in welcoming to McMinnville and Warren County, Mr. Terry Bulger.
How's that? Good, good, good. Well, thank you, Jane, very much. I appreciate it. It's great to be in Warren County. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I was talking to Jane earlier, and I said, this might be the biggest room I've ever spoken to. So I was impressed when I came and saw the parking lot and saw all those cars, and I thought, wow. Very, very impressive, and it's good to see all of you. Channel 5 viewers out there who are wondering who I am? How many? Come on. There's a few. You know, I was in McMinnville years ago, in like 1991, and helped me with this. I think the fellow's name was Ray Davis. Does that name ring a bell? What was it? Rayford? And what was the last name? Okay, I just knew him as Ray for some reason. And he tried to did he put the chandelier in the cavern? Roy Davis. Okay, that's who I was thinking of. It's been 20-some years. Did that ever work out? And I know he was planning also a pipe organ. That's in there too? I think he might have had the pipe organ in it when I did it. Anyway, that came to mind. I mean, it's 20-some years ago, but that's very good. Good to know. Well, I'm here tonight as someone that you might know by watching Channel 4, and I'm also here tonight as a cancer survivor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both. First, a little bit about my life at Channel 4. I do what are called feature stories, which means they're the story that I always like to tell folks are a reminder that the world isn't as bad as everything else you probably just saw on the news. I personally think there should be more of these kinds of stories, but there's a sort of belief in the world of television news that people wouldn't watch them. I disagree, but there's more people that have the other opinion. So my stories are basically designed to kind of show off Tennessee and Tennesseans and places in Tennessee. I started doing it in 1990 and kind of thought I'd run out of ideas in about a month. So it's 23 years later and I've still got plenty of ideas, which says a lot about Tennessee and the people of Tennessee. I'm going to show you a couple of stories first, just to kind of give you an idea of what it is I do. The first story, and we try to find the unusual, things that maybe you've lived here all your life and you didn't even know about. Those are some of the best stories, if I can find something like that, especially for me being a guy who grew up on the south side of Chicago. It's kind of fun to come to Tennessee and say, I bet you never knew this. There aren't many of them, but there's a couple. This is an example. I'd always known that there was a place in Tennessee, a little town called Dull, D-U-L-L. I always wondered, what would it be like to live in Dull, Tennessee? There's probably questions that would come to your mind. There were that came to mind. The problem was in Dull, there's not really anything to take a picture of because there really isn't a whole lot going on there. So my job was, let's go to Dull and figure out a way to tell the story of Dull, Tennessee.
Ain't much happens around here.
When it comes to excitement, the folks who live here never had a chance.
Well, after you get up here and you see the sign, and it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of dull.
This is Dull, a Dickson County town halfway between Charlotte and Ashland City. You live here, you know the question that's coming.
Everybody just wants to know, is it really dull and dull? And we tell them everything but.
Wynn and Dorothy Corlew, married now for 45 years. Why choose the dull life?
Somebody else made that decision for us, because we were born here.
A place where websites are still mostly just home for spiders.
Well, it's just laid back.
Peaceful and quiet.
Between you, me, and the fence posts, there's not much to see here. The Dull Country store closed years ago. You gotta drive to the Dull outskirts to shop.
This is what we do in the afternoon. Sit right here.
Business never booms at the Midpoint Market. Take it from the well-rested staff.
Won't be any business at all, and that's kind of what we were looking for in the first place.
Skip Craig moved to Tennessee from California 3 years ago, not sure where he'd live.
Drove down the road, saw the sign, Dull, and I said, this is where I want to stop.
He stopped, opened the store, and took a deep breath.
Grass grows slower, paint chips a little slower, wind doesn't blow too much there. It kind of circles around Dull and comes into here.
The wind isn't the only thing.
Lower it down.
Just when all this peaceful Dull talk is about to put you to sleep, Dull drivers wake you up. Listen up.
And you didn't see a wreck?
A wreck on Highway 49, right in front of the quiet store. No injury, just irony.
Life is just too fast here. People will not slow down. It's the hustle, the bustle. This happens all the time.
Yeah. Welcome to Dull.
Dull may describe the lifestyle, but it's not how this place got its name. The postmaster here came up with it 100 or so years ago. How? Well, his name was John Dull.
It's not all dull here. Come to Curvy Road Sawmill.
The sawmill is definitely sharp.
All in a place where one word doesn't have to be a bad thing.
It's an advertisement for life here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can sit back and enjoy yourself.
Terry Bulger, Channel 4 News.
I was just going to say that nobody was hurt in that car accident, and it was just a little fender bender, but it was, you know, perfect for me for telling a story. You go to a town called Dull. What are the chances that that would happen? You know, something like that probably hadn't happened forever there. I wonder if it was because, you know, we had a camera on the porch pointed at them, and the guy driving probably was like, well, he'd never seen a camera before, and ran into what was in front of us. But those 4 people sitting there that ran that store were like right out of Hollywood as far as I was concerned, because they were perfect. So sometimes you just get lucky. Now think about that story if those folks weren't there. There wasn't a whole lot to sort of play with. So you just kind of have to use your imagination, try to be creative, and take what is given to you. And in that case, a lot was given to me. I'm going to show you one more story. This is one of my favorite stories. It's a story about a man that I never met. And I'd always heard about this person in far eastern Tennessee, real close to the Kentucky-Virginia line. And I always wanted to try to find a way to tell his story. His name was Harrison Mays. I never met him, but I'll never forget him.
The Appalachian town of Middlesboro, Kentucky has always made its living off the land. Coal and timber are the ways of life up here. Both can be dangerous. Clyde Mays knows the danger of a coal mine firsthand.
I worked in coal mines 30 years.
You know coal mining is dangerous when you switch to a sawmill because this is safer. 75 years ago, a collapsed coal mine crushed Clyde's father and changed all of their lives forever. Today on the streets of this town, everyone knows what happened when doctors told Harrison Mays he wouldn't survive.
He said, "I'll outlive most of y'all." And he did.
Harrison Mays forever credited his survival with a conversation he had that night with God.
Asked the Lord to spare him and said that he would serve the Lord the rest of his life if indeed the Lord saw fit to do that.
2 weeks later, he was out of the hospital. Just 20 years old, it was time to hold up his end of the bargain.
And he came up with this idea, this thing that eventually became an obsession and became known throughout the region, throughout the country, I guess.
His idea was spread the word through signs. Signs with a simple message.
Get right with God. That was his message.
He would work 16 hours every day in the coal mine and then come home and make signs, day after day for 68 years.
One for Arkansas and
he wasn't satisfied with just Kentucky.
this one for Arizona, one for California, Connecticut, Florida, and Illinois. And he's got them up in all the states except those.
He wasn't satisfied just putting them in this country.
This one to be erected in Germany in 1990. This one's for Egypt.
Nor was he satisfied with just putting them on Earth.
India.
Remember, he made these in the 1930s, back when space travel was considered crazy.
He was about 40 years ahead of his time, I'd say. No, he wasn't crazy.
These concrete crosses weighed 1,400 pounds. Harrison Mays would make them, load them into his pickup truck, and head out on the road, planting them wherever he saw fit. His son James, in his 70s now, would go along to help.
He wasn't satisfied if it wasn't working. No, he wasn't one of these that went fishing. He wasn't one that went on pleasure trips. It's always a trip, putting these signs up.
For 68 years, Harrison Mays crisscrossed the country looking for perfect places for these concrete crosses. Once, back in the 60s, he put one up near Yellowstone Park. Well, that didn't sit too well with park rangers who wrote and told him that his crosses violated beautification laws. Harrison Mays wrote back and kindly disagreed, saying, "The cross I put up says, 'Get right with God.' There is nothing on earth more beautiful than that." Every penny he made that didn't go to his family went to this. He saved money by wearing overalls and riding a bicycle, with a sign attached, of course. If money was left over, he gave it to the poorest of Appalachia's people, all part of the promise.
Well, I'd say over the course of 50 years, he spent $200,000 or $300,000 of his own money. Yeah.
When the signs ran out, he'd throw bottles into rivers and oceans with the same message. He got quite creative, sending signs around the world.
And I don't know what it says. He did them in 13 foreign languages. But that says, "Prepare to meet God."
He made signs that he knew would be irresistible.
People would come and look and see if anybody's watching, and then they'd look in the hole.
When they looked, they saw this. Around his house, he made signs people would stumble into.
This is what he did with the walkway for a stumbling block. That's when you come in and stumble on that, you come back and read it. Sanctification.
Not even roaming livestock were safe.
And it occurred to him some way that that would be a great way to get his message. He painted 2 words on either side of this pig, this big hog, and those 2 words were, "Sin not."
Today, his signs are on display at the Smithsonian in Washington and at John Rice Irwin's Museum of Appalachia. His message is still getting seen.
If I had to choose one word to describe him, I guess it would be honesty, because he really did the thing that he thought he should do in the way he should do it.
What causes a man to give 68 years of his life, every free moment, every free penny? The Bible says, "Take what is whispered in your ear and proclaim it from the roofs." Harrison Mays proclaimed it from the roofs and the roadways. He kept his word by spreading the word.
And he lived all that promise, all them years. So him and the Lord must have been a-talking.
Today, only the signs remain. Harrison Mays died in 1986. He was 88. His sight set on heaven, prepared to meet God.
If Harrison didn't make it, I'd sure hate to try to make it myself.
The fellow talking in that story was Harrison's son, who at the time I talked to him was probably 70 years old as well. So my favorite line in that story is when the son was talking about his father, who he had a little bit of bitterness because as a kid, they never went on vacations because he would talk about his dad, and all he did was every nickel he had went to the signs. So he was kind of like, you know, we never got a trip, we never got a vacation. Everything was about the signs. But for somebody to be that committed from the age of 19 to he lived to be 86 is amazing. And I love the line at the end when the son says, him and the Lord must have been a-talking. Yeah. For somebody to be that committed, he knew something up there was going on. So those are kind of the stories that I like to do. That one was special to me because I just think it's so impactful that somebody could devote their lives like that to something they so strongly believed in. So I'm going along doing these stories, and in 1996, I wasn't really feeling great, so I was having some difficulties with just the way I was feeling, and went to the hospital a couple of times, went to doctors, and I remember one time they cleaned my ears out, thinking that was my problem. They were wrong. And after that, I went back a couple of times and said, you know, that didn't do it. Something's not right. So at that point, they start getting more serious, and you hear words like CAT scan, and that made them see something that they didn't really feel was right, and they were right. And then you hear words like MRI. And then the next words you hear are two words that you don't want to hear, and those were brain tumor. So in 1996, doctors told me that I had a brain tumor and that I probably would need to have surgery tomorrow. So I'm hearing those two words for the first time, and then I'm hearing the word tomorrow. So you would can certainly understand the reaction. I had to call my parents in Chicago and tell them. I'd never spent a day in the hospital in my life. So it's like, you know, I don't know, I can't really remember what I was thinking at the time, but it was like completely shocking, new, and wow, what do I do now? So I didn't really have a whole lot of time to think. The surgery happened literally the next day, and you start hearing other words that you've never heard before in your life. One to me was oncology. I'm sure many of you here know that word. I did not. I was 31 years old. I didn't know what they were talking about when they said you will have to see an oncologist. So I quickly discovered what that meant. Chemotherapy. Kind of knew what that meant, but I never really broke it down. I knew it was a bad word. I knew it was a word I probably didn't want to hear, although in a way I kind of looked at it like it had become my friend, chemotherapy, because it was doing the things that I needed it to do at that time. And I figured out chemo meant chemical drug, therapy, medicine. So it's basically just a scarier word for medicine. So I had brain surgery, which still isn't the easiest thing to say. And then after that, 4 months of chemotherapy and about 28 or 29 radiation treatments. Now, if you saw in that story, which was maybe from the early 1990s, I had a full head of hair. I contend to this day that it wasn't the chemotherapy or age that knocked my hair out, but it was the radiation. And the doctors agree with me on that one. With chemotherapy, the hair comes back. Radiation, especially when it's radiation to the head, the hair does not. So, you know, not that big of a sacrifice as far as I'm concerned. That's why I wear a baseball hat a lot of times too. It's not really to hide anything. I've always just liked wearing a baseball hat. I didn't wear it tonight. I'd be the only one in the room, so that's probably a good idea. But, so, you know, you go through all of that. It was a long period in your life. How many cancer survivors are in the room today? It's a good amount, unfortunately, but I'm glad you're all here. You know, some of the things that you have to do when you're going through cancer, I had to give myself shots. Have any of you had to do that? Where you have to actually take the needle and do it to yourself and fill it up like you're the doctor? You know, and they always explain all of what you're going to have to do, like, you know, they've explained it to people hundreds and hundreds of times. You're hearing it for the first time, and you're thinking, what? Huh? I gotta do what? But eventually you learn that this is the best thing for you right now. You don't have a choice, and you have to do it. Through the years, I've heard words that people come up to me and say, oh, you're so courageous and you're a hero. And that's baloney, quite honestly. Courage and heroic are absolutely not words that can be attributed to me. I had no idea what I was doing. I basically just listened to the doctors, did what they told me to do, and, you know, prayed. Beyond that, you know, I was as scared as anybody would be, and I would imagine some of those same emotions can be felt in this room. You know, I have no advice, really, strong advice for survivors. You all are here. You all are obviously doing something right and something great. You've got great people around you, I'm assuming, which I certainly had as well, and that's helpful. But it's a scary thing, and, you know, this fight that you all are so involved in Warren County, which proves Warren County is strong and tough, and that's kind of what you have to be. You know, I was never the person who said, why me? And especially with my television job, I've run across people before I was diagnosed that were going through tough things. And I would always say to myself, you know, I'm so lucky that I've never really had any kind of battle like they've had to do. And I always wondered, you know, why am I so lucky? So instead of ever saying, why me, I kind of was one to say, why not me? You know? And I don't know if that approach helped me in any way, but it helped me deal with what I had to deal with. When I was going through chemotherapy, I remember that radiation was the next part of the plan, and I didn't want to know one thing about radiation. I knew eventually I'd have to deal with it, but at the time that it was all happening, it's such a whirlwind that it was one step at a time. Why worry about what's next when you're dealing with what you're dealing with right now? I heard somebody earlier, and it was Larry, who said, somebody walked by, and I heard Larry say, hi, so-and-so, you look good. And I said, hey, Larry, the person you said that to, is it somebody that's dealing with cancer right now? And he said, yeah. I heard those three words so much back in 1996, and some people I've heard kind of almost get offended when they hear that, like, oh, you look good, knowing maybe you don't really look good. It never offended me. Nobody ever used to say to me, you look good. You know? Yeah, so anytime I would hear it, even if I didn't really believe it, I still always thought it was kind of nice. Oh, you look good, okay, I'll take that. Not a lot of positives that come with a brain tumor cancer diagnosis, but that might have been one. A couple of things, too, that, you know, in a way you regret them. I tell people, don't believe everything that you hear, and don't believe everything that you read on the internet. There's good stuff and bad stuff. A lot of it is bad stuff, and it just freaks you out. I would hear things from people that didn't know what they were talking about, and you'd hear bad things and take them to heart and think, oh my gosh, that's not good, huh? What did he say? He said that? And typically they didn't know what they were talking about, but because you're in a position that you're so vulnerable, anytime you hear something bad, your immediate reaction is, oh no, they know something that I don't know. So I found that to be a whole lot of wasted time and wasted energy. I guess my last piece of advice is listen to your doctors. You know, they were great with me. They're very matter of fact. That took me a while to get adjusted to. The man who did my brain surgery, you know, told me things that at the time you can't even believe you're hearing them. I remember like the first thing after the surgery, he said, well, you know, you do have, you know, had brain tumor, you have cancer. You know, of course there isn't a cure, so, you know. And at that time, you know, you don't really even think about that. When I was 30 years old, you know, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, cancer, there isn't a cure. Yeah, I've heard that on the news and stuff before. You know, you don't even really think about it until it dramatically affects your life. But dealing with doctors who are quick to just give you the facts without any sort of bedside manner. I remember I had a little bit of time to kind of look, they had a medical book, sort of a graduation book of the doctor that was going to do my brain surgery. And I had met him, and then I saw his graduation picture when he was maybe 40 years younger, when he was just getting out of med school. And he was kind of bespectacled and kind of looked like the guy who on Saturday night at med school was hanging out in the library and not hanging out at the big parties, which I thought, this is the guy I want. This is the guy for me. And he turned out to be terrific. His bedside manner, he would say certain things to me that made me think, boy, this isn't good, but so far it's been okay. So that's part of a very large part of my life as well. And having the opportunity to talk to folks who maybe are going through what I went through. I don't know how close to your diagnosis you all are, but you know, there is hope, certainly, even at the worst times. I remember when I would go through treatment, I remember a nurse said to me once, you know, this is just going to be a blip on your radar, is all it's going to be. And it was like, you never really heard a lot of positive things, and it's not necessarily that she knew what she was talking about, but it was just good to hear something positive. And so, you know, embrace the positive and try to avoid the negative. One last thing, and I'm happy to take questions, but I think about my television life. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take questions. Anybody, and you can ask me anything you want. I'll tell you all about Demetria if you really want to know that. Don't be bashful. This is what I do for a living. I ask questions all the time. I find people love to talk about themselves when it's because they've done something good. Now, if you're hiding something or you did something bad, you want no part of television reporters. But if you've done something good, and that's my stories are always about people doing interesting things, interesting people. I did a story on a 14-year-old girl 9 years ago who went to Hendersonville High School, and they told me, yeah, this girl's pretty good. She plays guitar and sings. We went out, did the story, and I wrote it and said, yeah, that girl's, you know, she's pretty good. For her age, she's far beyond her years. A year later, I went back to the kind of a follow-up and said, yeah, she's getting better. Well, 8 years later, she's Taylor Swift. See, sometimes you never know. You know, I still have that story. It's kind of fun to show people, hey, look at this little girl. Does she look familiar? And it was funny because when I went back and listened to the song, I don't know if any Taylor Swift fans are here, she was singing a song when she was 15, and it was about crying and a guitar, and I went back and listened to it, and it's that song, Teardrops on My Guitar. Does anybody know that song? So she was singing that song when she was 15. So that just kind of shows you that she, nobody was providing songs for her. She was making them up her own self. So running across people like that kind of livens up my life. Yes, sir.
Terry, am I correct that you were with or around Dan Miller when he passed away? If so, could you talk about Dan and what kind of person he was?
Absolutely, yes, I was. Dan was from Augusta, Georgia, and was a golf fan as much as I am. And for a couple of years, we would go to the Masters in Augusta. Dan, me, and Rudy Kalis. And Dan was so proud to show off Augusta. I don't think there was anything that wasn't human, like his wife and kids, that he loved more than Augusta, Georgia. So he got such a big kick out of, you know, showing us, this is where my high school reunion was, and all this, you know, every detail about his life in Augusta. And yes, we spent a great day at the golf course in 2009. And Dan, I can't say he wasn't feeling well. He was feeling great. And, you know, we were walking, and the golf course is hilly, and there's a lot of walking involved. And we kept saying to Dan, hey, are you okay? You know, every time he'd say, absolutely. Where do you want to go? Let's go. I don't know if he was feeling bad at the time or not, but he wanted to be a part of it as much as anything. We had a great time, and then later that night, you know, he passed away. But Dan was my best friend at Channel 4. For a couple of years, I worked in the sports department. I did the sports. And I didn't really like it because, one, I had to stay till 10:30 at night because you got to do the sports at 10 o'clock. And the only thing that was good about it was Dan was there too. So he was always the guy I could, you know, I'd go in his office and sit down and we'd just talk about whatever. Fun stuff, crazy stuff, you know. But Dan was always the guy, you know, he'd try to get me to listen to music. We had similar musical tastes. Sorry. I'm from the south side of Chicago. The last thing I ever wanted to listen to growing up was country music. I thought, country music? Are you serious? Then I moved to Nashville. And I would go out into the countryside and run across these old timers with guitars singing songs about, you know, my little old home down in New Orleans, you know, old Jimmy Rogers songs. Does anybody know who Jimmy Rogers was here? Jimmy Rogers, the old brakeman. And I loved these songs. So because of some of that, I became a big fan of country music, mostly the old country music stuff, you know. Kind of listen to in a way I feel like I was born too late, because I like the country music songs from the 50s and 60s and a lot of the old timers. But because of that, Dan knew that I liked that stuff too, and he would try to get me to listen to some stuff that was beyond crazy. I'm trying to think of the fellow's name that he would listen to. And I could always be honest with him and tell him, no, Dan, sorry, I do not. That is terrible. And he would look at me like I was crazy, like, how can you not like this? Listen again. But we had that kind of a relationship that there was no phoniness to it. In a world where there's a lot of phoniness these days, I don't know if you've noticed, but Dan was as simple and nice in person as he came across on television. Kind of a shy person, believe it or not, so he wasn't necessarily the type of person that would come up and say hi and start talking to you, but if you came up and said hi to him, he would engage you in conversation. Dan was not the kind of guy who would go out to the fancy restaurant for like a big steak dinner. That was not him. He was happiest with an egg salad sandwich. That is the absolute truth. And quite honestly, he was happier after the second egg salad sandwich. We would drive to Augusta, and there was a place in Chattanooga, a little restaurant, and we always would have to stop there and eat for lunch, because the whole trip we would have to listen to Dan rave about the amaretto pie that we were going to get after our lunch.
every time we made the trip, there would be the stop in Chattanooga. It was those kind of simple things that Dan embraced and loved, and, you know, it was so great just to be around him, and I miss him every day, especially when I'm at Channel 4. Being somebody that's been there a while, it was always nice to talk to somebody who had been there a while, was so wise and just smart, and somebody you could ask anything, and he always just had a great way of looking at things.
What's your thoughts on Bill Hall?
Bill Hall, did you say?
Yeah, Bill Hall.
Well, Bill's another legend at Channel 4. When I first got to Channel 4, I'd watch Bill do the weather, and I would kind of shake my head and think, I don't really get it. Okay. He doesn't really do anything special. There's no fancy lasers and all the stuff that they do today. But that's what made Bill who he was. Just straightforward, didn't try to scare you. You know, sometime these days it seems like there's a little bit maybe more of that. You could do things with the radar behind you, or you could brighten it up and make it, you know, a serious red, the scary looking colors and stuff, which a lot of weather folks do to try to make people watch. Bill was so adamant about not doing that. He treated the viewer like they were family or like a friend, and he didn't want to scare people unnecessarily. He told you what it was and what he thought it was going to be without trying to hype it up. And, you know, I think Bill would happily define himself as just a good old boy, good old Tennessee, fishing, hunting, outdoors, gardening kind of guy. And because of that, you know, he was kind of everybody's friend at Channel 4. Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to continue working during your treatments?
I didn't work, I know for sure. In fact, today I was kind of looking back through the files just to sort of remind myself. I did not work while I was going through chemotherapy, and that was about a 4-month process. And then when I started radiation, I think there was a little break in between the two because they have to let you kind of get stronger. And then during radiation, I would go to radiation in the morning. For those of you who don't know, radiation was quick. You know, it took just a couple of minutes once they got you in and positioned and everything. And then after that, I would go to work. So I was lucky with the chemotherapy. I never really got sick or anything. They had pills that you took, and I was fortunate that way. But yeah, for the most part, I did go back to work, although I would say it was probably 4 or 5 months. I remember, you know, the first time you go out after coming back from surgery and stuff was a big sort of milestone. So it was definitely baby steps, and I was in no hurry to get back to work. Anybody else? Well, I'll just say one more thing about my life in television. And, you know, it reminds me when I grew up on the south side of Chicago, a long way from Nashville. And when I was about 12 years old, I had a paper route, like many of you probably had. And I'd get up in the morning, whether it was cold, rainy, snow, whatever, and deliver those newspapers to the people along my newspaper route. And I remember walking around throwing the papers on the porch, and I'd often think, you know, geez, I wonder what it's going to be like to be grown up and have a grown-up's job. And now, so many years later, I'm at Channel 4, and in a way, I'm still delivering the news, the good news, and now it's people along my Channel 4 television route. And sometimes I still think what it would be like to be grown up and have a grown-up's job. Thank you all very, very much. Appreciate you having me.
Terry.
Yes.
We are so glad you came our way. We have a gift basket for you, and in this basket are products made here in Warren County. And we want you to take this and enjoy it. We have also enclosed a map of McMinnville and Warren County. We'd like for you to come back sometime and visit our back roads. Would you do that?
I'll do it.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Jane.
And Terry, we also have a relay shirt for you.
Absolutely.
And when you wear that, if you'll think about us here in McMinnville and Warren County and your visit with us, we appreciate that.
Will do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Can I give you a little plug here, Terry? Sure. This is off your website, so hope it's right. Now you can see Bulger's Beat during Channel 4 News at 4 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and Breakfast with Bulger each Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday morning on Channel 4 WSMV TV. Is that right?
And always on the internet, WSMV.com.
WSMV.com on the internet. Thanks, Terry. I'd like to introduce now Mr. She's not really. Ms. Marlene DeLong, who is a dear friend. She is with the American Cancer Society, and she is our senior community representative. She works so hard with us during Relay, and she's one of the reasons that our Relay event is so successful. And Marlene's going to come and do some special recognitions. Marlene.
Thank you, Ms. Jane, for those kind words. I do want to say thank you to Ms. Cindy and to all of her staff from Homeland Community Bank, Ms. Jane, everyone that has had a part in making this event so special for our cancer survivors tonight. I want to say thank you, Ms. Cindy. Y'all did a great job this year. I have several of my Relay for Life committee members that are in attendance tonight. So to all of my dear friends and co-workers that helps me on the Relay for Life and the Relay for committee, thank you so much for your hard work throughout the year. And my job is to recognize our survivors tonight. So what we're going to do is, if you have been a cancer survivor 1 year or less, please stand up. Cancer survivor 1 year or less, please stand up. All right, if you have been a cancer survivor 5 years or less, please stand up. 5 years or less. 10 years. If you have been diagnosed with cancer in the past 10 years, please stand up. Okay, if you have been a cancer survivor 15 years or less, please stand up. What about 20 years? 20 years? 20 years? Yeah, 20 or less. Yeah, 20 or less. Okay. 25 years or less? 25 years? Wow. $30 years or less? 30? Wow. What about 35 years or less? 35 years or less? Wow. 40 years or less? Cancer survivor. 40, okay. What about 45 or less? I know we got to be getting close to Miss Jo, and we're always on the other end. So when I'm on the other end recognizing cancer survivors, Miss Jo, how many years have you been a cancer survivor? 51 years a cancer survivor. So, Miss Jo, do you have some words that you would like to say or anything you would like to share with us tonight? Okay, you sure can.
Last year, when I was here, I made the remark that I didn't want to appear to be greedy, but I wanted to be back this year again. And I thought about something, and I thought about it all year long. Do you remember when there was a racetrack out by the VFW, right on this side of the river? And our local boys took their cars out there and they ran. You had the Leo Lawrence and Charles Hullett and Bernard Smith, and well, there were several of them, and Howard Powers, and he drove the 5U4. When that was going on, they were having some good races, and then this man pulls up one night in a different car. He came from Nashville, I think, and his name was Bud Fox. And he was a stranger, and because he was a stranger, it was great to see somebody new come in. And he won the race, and the whole crowd applauded. And he came back the next week, and he won the race, and the crowd applauded. He came back the next week, and most of the crowd applauded. He came back the next week, and some of the crowd applauded. And they got tired of looking at him. They really didn't want him to win that race. But I'm back. It's 51 years, but I have started a new calendar. As of April the 2nd, I had surgery. I once again had cancer, and I had surgery. So I'm one of the shortest time survivors and one of the longest time survivors. And that's what I wanted to say. And I am so grateful. I'm not here because of anything I've done or because I'm worthy or anything like that. I'm here just by the grace of God. And thank you.
Real quick, we want to thank Miss Marlene again. She's a lady of many hats. Saturday, she graduated from Montlow State Community College, and also she's a graduate of Leadership Van Buren. Let's give Miss Marlene. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the largest crowd. We just want you to know how wonderful it is to have each of you here tonight. And just to let you know, our official registration for survivors tonight was 111 of you sitting here in the auditorium. And we, as much as we love you and we want to see you each year, we know we can't take credit for that. You look at our mugs every year, so Mr. Bulger, thank you. We think that's attributed to you being here with us tonight. So thank you again for being with us.